Good morning. I hope today has already been an encouragement to you as it has to me. I really liked that song, that new one that you did. I don't remember singing it before, but I'm glad we're singing it now. So anyway, and we were singing the song about more to be desired are there than gold, and that's one of Adele's favorite songs too. So we were really enjoying that. But anyway, it's always good to sing and to be together no matter what the weather, and I suppose it's going to rain a little bit later, and we'll deal with that, but it's good to be together today. We are going to be looking at Matthew 17, and as we are doing that, I want us to, I really struggled exactly with, a name for this. I wanted to say something like a series of unfortunate failures or something like that, because what we have seen over the last few weeks is that there has been failure on the part of the disciples to understand exactly what they were supposed to be doing or how they were supposed to be thinking. And I think that it is important for us to see these things because sometimes we are paralyzed by our own failures. We recognize that as we are living our faithful life, as we are interacting with people, as we are trying to be among people in the world and trying to be that light, we mess up. And sometimes, even in our own thoughts and even in our own motivations as we are living our lives, we come to God in prayer or something like that, or we do something, or we say something, or we think something, and then we realize, that's not really very Christ-like. In fact, it's not Christ-like at all, and once again, somehow, I've not lived up to the standard that God has set for me. And so I think that it's important as we take a look at some of these passages for us to understand that there are some things here that the disciples are working through. Being a disciple does not mean that we attain or achieve perfection on day one. It's something that we are constantly going toward. It's something that we're constantly moving toward until God calls us home. I remember talking with my 95-year-old grandmother. She died at age 97. The last conversation I had with her was a good conversation at age 97. But I remember her at 95 saying things like, oh, you know what? It's still a struggle. It's still something that I have to work on, to live by faith and to do these things as God wants us to do. So I want us to just recap briefly about some things. Really, as we're taking a look at Matthew 17, and I really didn't think this out when I was coming through it, but as I have gone through and taken a look at the theme of discipleship, it seems that there are so many lessons packed in these verses and in the parallel verses in Mark and Luke. And again, some of this stuff John does not have, but as we take a look at these things, they're there. So we have Peter's confession in Matthew 16, 13 through 20. Jesus, what he does from there on, he begins to explain to the disciples he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law. This right there was unpalatable to Peter. It was unpalatable to the disciples. This is something that they weren't all that happy about. And as Jesus is doing that, Peter says, Jesus, you're out of line. This shall never happen. This is not something that should be going on. And Jesus, he turns to Peter and he says, out of my sight, Satan. The one that he called the rock just a few verses ago, he is now calling Satan. So we have that rebuke. We have that going on. We have the transfiguration that is going on, and Jesus takes just three of them up, Peter, James, and John. He takes three of them up to a high mountain by themselves. He was transfigured before them. And Peter says, let's make three booths. Let's make three shelters for you three. And there's some not understanding of what's going on. God tells the disciples, this is my son whom I love, with him I am well pleased, listen to him. He's the one that you need to listen to. And so we see this, and we see that they're coming down the mountain, and it's just Peter, James, and John. And we have this going on, and they're asking them some questions. They say, we gotta get our minds wrapped around something. We gotta understand some things. Help us understand. And Jesus is explaining some things, and he's making sure that they're understanding what's going on. Again, we see this discipleship process as a process. We see this continuing with continuing shift needed in the disciples' minds as we take a look at Matthew 17, 14 through 23. I want to read these verses. Bear in mind that he is just coming off the transfiguration. He is bringing Peter, James, and John with him. When they came to the crowd, okay, so they're coming off the mountain, they come to a crowd. A man approached Jesus and knelt before him. "Lord, have mercy on my son," he said. "He is an epileptic and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him." And Jesus says, "O unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me." Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed from that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And he replied, "Because you have so little faith. I tell you the truth. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." When they came together in Galilee, he said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life." And his disciples were filled with grief. Jesus keeps on hitting them with that one, doesn't he? He keeps on hitting them with that one on this. And I take a look at this passage, and there are some things that are pretty clear to me as we are looking at this. We have a crowd, and we have a man, and he's approaching Jesus, and he's kneeling before him, and he says, "Lord, have mercy on my son. He is an epileptic and is suffering greatly." And so we have this whole thing. We find out in a few verses later that the source of this epilepsy is demon possession. That's what's going on here. And I want us to see right here in this particular passage that it's the man's father, the son's father, who is coming to Jesus and requesting this. You don't see anything in the demon possession in any passage in Scripture where the demon possessed is coming to Jesus asking for help. What you have instead is the demons trying to keep Jesus from doing the very thing that Jesus wants to do. And so you have the man on the other side of the lake who is filled with a legion of demons, and he says, "What do you want with us?" And so you have this boy here, and he is unable, he is incapable of doing this. And I think that this is sort of a lesson for us. There are people that we know who are suffering greatly. It is okay for us to appeal to God on behalf of someone who is not really wanting to have anything to do with Jesus, or is incapable of having anything to do with Jesus. There are things that people go through, and they don't even have the wherewithal to be able to ask for help. It is part of what is our honor to bring them before Jesus and to do this. However, the disciples are unable to do it. And Jesus, again, he comes at them pretty hard. He says, "O believing and perverse generation, how long shall I put up with you? How long shall I be with you? How long will I put up with you?" And so we have this thing that, again, I think about him turning to Peter, and that was only about a week ago. He turned to Peter and says, "Get out of my sight, Satan. You don't have in mind the things of God." And over here, he's talking to the remaining 9 disciples that did not go up on the mountain with him, and he's saying, "Oh, unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you?" It's a pretty emphatic rebuke. And I want us to see that what Jesus is doing here is he's not just rebuking the 9, he's rebuking the generation who is unbelieving. The generation that will reject him, the generation that he's talking about, saying he's going to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised alive. And so we got all this going on, and Jesus, he is lumping these 9 along with everybody else, saying, "Where's the faith? How long am I going to need to put up with you? I've had you 12 with me the whole time. I've had that happen." And there is a lack of faith. Mark, and in his particular account of this, he talks about prayer. When he's talking with the disciples, when they come to him and they ask him, "Why can't this happen?" He says, "This kind can only come out by prayer." We will talk about that a little bit later, but I want us to keep that in mind, that this prayer is part of this. But I think that the Matthew passage makes clear you couldn't drive it out, but it's because of your lack of faith. But I got to tell you something. If you have the faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, "Move from here to there," and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. And we take a look at that, and we say, wow, these disciples, their faith must have been smaller than the mustard seed. Right? Yeah. Because Because this should have been something that they could have done. This should have been something that they had the ability to do if they had the faith. And I take a look at this and I think about this passage and I think, you know what? I wouldn't mind having some of this type of faith to take care of some things that are going on around my house, some things that are problems in my life, and all that type of thing. And we take a look at this, and people take a look at this and say, you know what, I can do anything. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And if I had this kind of faith, I wish I had this kind of faith, then I could accomplish all sorts of things. But I don't think that that's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, look, if the mountain is standing in your way of your relationship with God, or if this mountain is somehow impacting someone else's faith, if you've got this particular situation going on, faith can move that. Faith can make that happen. It's not a matter of me wishing that my garden would self-till or anything like that. It's a matter rather of aligning my will with God's will and realizing what God's will is and moving in that direction. Anything that God requires of me can be done if I just have the faith that it can be done. This is the case. I know, we just tilled up the garden yesterday, and so it's a very real thing in my back and in my mind. So what's the deal here? Well, we're talking discipleship. And I'm not necessarily sure of all the factors that are going on in here, but you know, I wonder somehow if there isn't just a certain degree of smugness. They had done this thing before. In Mark and in Luke, as we look at these passages, it seems that what the 12 had done, if you take a look at Luke 9, 1 through 2, Jesus had commissioned his disciples to go out. And what had he commissioned them to do? He had commissioned them to take the gospel with them, the good news, and also to heal the sick and to cast out demons. And they went and they did these things to the extent that Herod heard about it and said, you know what, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, the guy that I killed. They had been doing these incredible things, but they're unprepared now. Today is a pretty important football game for some of you. Eagles versus Cowboys. I think that the score last time, there was a wedding going on, by the way. The score last time was a little close. It was a little bit hairy for some of those wearing green. I think sometimes, and we know this about sports teams sometimes, you know, it's kind of like, you know what, we had a hard week, we were up for it, we did what we were doing, and now we're playing, I don't know, who's the worst one in the league now? We're playing so-and-so, and so we can take a break. And then that team, having done so well against Kansas City or something, falls apart. The Buccaneers were always bad when I was growing up, but I think that they're doing pretty well today. I'm wondering if that's the smugness that these disciples had. You know what, we can handle this. We know what to do. Yeah, bring the demon possessed. It's all right, we got this. It didn't work. It wasn't working. Maybe there's insecurity. Jesus is not right there with them. We're dealing with a situation, and you know, I can think about all of this in a certain sense that, you know, when you are doing something and you are learning something for the first time, you do like to have someone right there with you while you're doing it. You know, the first time that I ever had to change the oil in my car, I had to think about how my dad did it and what he did, and it would have been great if he was right there with me. Wait, do I put the oil around the ring? Is that what I'm supposed to do so that I can get the oil filter off? Or what do I do? How do I do it? And sometimes you mess up because the person that is your mentor is not there. Jesus is up on the mountain and they're a little insecure. Or maybe they're lackadaisical in their relationship, and I really think that this hits the nail on the head on this particular one. I think that sometimes when we are talking about what our relationships are, we can be lackadaisical in our relationship with God, and we take a look at what that relationship should be and how that relationship should function. And sometimes we take it for granted what our relationship is. And I think that if there's one lesson that we need to learn from all of our discussions, all of our talks about what discipleship is It is this, that discipleship requires intense relationship with Jesus Christ. It's not something that you can just say, oh, okay, you know what, it's Sunday morning, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get together with my brothers and sisters and think about Jesus. It's a daily thing. It is something that we absolutely need to be chewing on, thinking about. I got a question for you. What is your plan this week to improve your relationship with Jesus Christ? Do we stick the Bible on the shelves and just make sure that it's there for next Sunday? Or are we into the Word? Are we praying continually, like we are told to do? Or only when crisis comes? How are we thinking? What are we doing? Paul, who is not an intellectual lightweight, is talking about all sorts of things in the book of Romans, and he is getting deep, and he is making sure that he is really laying down some good reasons why people should follow Jesus Christ, and he's laying down all the things that God is, and he's making sure that the people understand, the people who are receiving the letter of Romans are understanding exactly what they have in Jesus Christ, and he's doing all of this, and he's explaining all these things. He's getting very deep. And then in chapter 11, verses 33 and following, he says this, "Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out! Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay him? For from him, and through him, and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen." And I'm afraid that for so many of us, we take a look at passages like this and we say, well, you know, God is just beyond me. I can't really plumb the depths of who he is, and I cannot think about how great he is. And I'm only scratching the surface. That's right. Paul understood that too, but it didn't keep him from trying. He kept on digging in. He kept on delving in. He kept on being motivated by God's grace and love, and he kept on thinking about it and dwelling on it and being transformed by it. That's what we are to be. That's how we are to look at it. And you know, there's something beautiful about a relationship where you keep on growing in that relationship. There's an author, a Czech author, he lived in exile in France for a number of years, and he just stayed there after communism fell. And I can't really recommend him because he's kind of crass in so many different ways. But his name is Milan Kundera. And he had a father who was a huge expert on Beethoven. And Beethoven had this way of taking one theme, and he just kept on going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper with that theme. You could listen to Beethoven, and it's just kind of like, okay, well, that's different than that. But then when you think about it, no, it's really not different than that. It just keeps on going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And his father lost the ability to speak. It wasn't a stroke or anything like that. It was just a disability that came on him with age, where he slowly lost the ability to communicate what was in his head. And finally, about the only thing that he could say, when he was coming up with things and he was trying to express what was going on in his brain, he comes up with it and he finally just says, "That's strange." And at one point he comes up to his son Milan and he's pointing out something about Beethoven. And Milan really wasn't getting it at the time. He had to think about it later, about what was going on. And his father's trying to show him something, and Milan's not getting it. He's not understanding it, and he's going, and his father says, "That's strange," and walks away. And Milan was thinking about this, and he said, "Man, I just really wish that I knew what my dad was trying to say. I really wish I understood what he was trying to get at." And then he realized what he was trying to get at. He was trying to show him the complexity of Beethoven and Beethoven's music and how it was deep and all this kind of stuff. And then Milan made this observation. He said, "You know, Many of us can deal with the eternity that passes by us every single day. We cannot suck the marrow out of every single moment. We cannot do that. But one of the things that we cannot stand is to not be able to plumb the depths of another person when that time is taken away from us. And so I think about my relationship with my wife, and I want to come to know her deeper and understand her better and get that understanding, and I'm still doing it. I'm still trying to figure her out. Not in a bad way, but in a good way. Trying to figure out exactly what makes her tick, and I'm always finding more and more things that are fascinating in that. That's what we need to be doing with God. We need to be plumbing those depths. On this side of heaven, we see dimly, as the writer of Hebrews says. One day, we shall see face to face. One day, we will know fully, even as now we are fully known by the one who created us, God. And so I challenge us to do this. I have an X there, Romans 11:33 through 36, in contrast with Revelation 2:4. I'm not going to go there necessarily, but that is where John is told, I want you to write to the church in Ephesus. And I want you to talk to them about some things. And he says, I have this one thing against you. You have lost your first love. Rekindle what is lost. Otherwise, you run the risk of not being my people anymore. And I think about what discipleship is, and I think about what Jesus is wanting, and he's wanting that first love. He's wanting that depth. He's wanting us to dig deep. And I think that as we take a look at these disciples, maybe they were smug, maybe they were insecure, maybe they were just plain lackadaisical, lazy in the relationship. We know that laziness in any human relationship doesn't work. How could we imagine that it could possibly work in a spiritual relationship? And so when the disciples came to Jesus, or when the man came to Jesus and says, look, your disciples couldn't do it, it's because the disciples had disattached their relationship to God from their ability to do things that God had given them the ability to do. Go out, heal the sick, go out, take care of the demon-possessed, go out, do these things. And they had forgotten that the source of that ability was found in their relationship with Jesus the Christ. So I could have called this a series of unfortunate failures. But it is not ever that if we take these opportunities to learn. And that's what I see with these disciples. The disciples come to Jesus in private and ask, why couldn't we drive it out? Because you have so little faith. And I'm thinking about what Jesus said, what Mark records as part of that answer. Matthew really concentrates this. He makes this a pretty short passage. But in Mark, this can only come out by prayer. Isn't that relational? Isn't that what that is? It's having that relationship with Jesus Christ. And Jesus is saying, look, if you want to make things happen for me and my kingdom, then you got to be really, really intimately involved with who I am. And that's done through prayer. And so I see these disciples, why couldn't we drive it out? And he answers them. But the other thing I see is, as we come to verses 22 and 23, they come together. And Jesus, once again, he said it to them in verse 21 of chapter 16 after Peter had confessed that he was the Christ. He said it to the three as he was coming down from the mountain after he says Elijah has already come and they did not recognize him but have done it to him everything they wished. In the same way the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. And he's saying it again. They will kill him and on the third day he will be raised to life. And the disciples are finally getting it. They were filled with grief. Because they are growing in their relationship with Jesus Christ. And they're finally coming to that understanding. This is discipleship. Next week, I think that I'm going to finish this particular series. I'm not exactly sure. But one of the things that I've become convinced of, and it was one of the things that I was talking with Sister Doris about today, is that we need to understand where our allegiances lie. We need to understand that we need to have Christ as Lord in every single area of our life. We need to make sure that we are following Him. If you have decided that this day you want to make Him your Lord, that you want to give your allegiance to Jesus Christ, we will be happy to help you in whatever way we can. By helping you join with Jesus in His death, burial, and resurrection in the waters of baptism and coming up a new creature. If you have any prayer requests that you need to make known to this congregation, if you're needing any guidance into that kind of thing, we're here to help you as we grow together to become more faithful disciples of Christ. Come to stand.